side.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's very interesting to talk about the property of the sponge as a place to live a lot of species on invertebrates. Okay, sponges are houses for another marine species.
That's it.
And it's
Oh,
very rich the number of different species who can inhabit inside
the
in
sponge.
the sponges. Okay.
Yes, crabs, worms, crustaceans, bivalves, cnidarians, everything. Lots of groups. You can find tens of species, different species living in the body of a sponge. Yes. And also, Jose, I think it's very interesting to point out that because they cannot flee or fight a predator, for example, they have evolved to have a very important complex compounds in their body. So they have every kind, well, I mean, not every kind, but many kinds of deleterious compounds like antibiotics and poisons, lots of components that make them that they are not tasty. In fact, many of these compounds are used by humans for anti-cancer fight, for drugs. They will use them and try to use them for many kinds of drugs. There are many sponges that have been found to have anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, antibiotics, and lots of compounds of a lot of interest.
Yes, the biotechnologic applications of this group are very interesting. Nowadays, some research teams in the world are looking for compounds from sponges for pharmaceutical use or biomedicine. It's really very, very interesting.
Yes. Another interesting, curious thing of sponges is something we always learn in biology, is that they are so simple that some scientists, when they're starting to study them, they found they can put a little sample of a sponge in a petri dish. You can break it, and if you leave it in seawater, of course, if you leave it for a few hours, they actually reconstruct again. They are so simple they can reconstruct the body again, a simple part of the body, because they have no tissues to build. So they join again the cells, and each cell knows what to do. And Jose, one interesting thing is the evolution. I mean, they are as simple as they are, the sponges. Actually, they are very well adapted to live. I mean, they are so simple because they don't need to be more complex to survive. They actually have found a place in the ecosystem that is one of the best places, and then they don't need to evolve to other forms because that's so simple and they can survive with little competence. Mm?
Yes, yes. I think it's very interesting this thing you are talking about because the simplicity of the organisms, the structure, shows um, the good adaptation of this kind of organisms to marine environment. No? I think
Yes.
it's really very interesting
Hmm.
that is possible find more than 1,000 different species because in the concept coral includes this kind of animals. These animals belongs to the Anthozoa phylum. Is a special group of marine organisms, and maybe the most typical individual is the this kind of it seems a tree. Okay, if you look the picture, you can see that it seems to be a small forest. Okay, each one of the individuals of the coral is a polyp, and this organism eats all the particles in the water. Okay, it's very interesting because the shape and the different forms to make this aggregation of individuals are very different. In the case of octocorallarians, okay, and hexacorallarians. They are different groups in the corals, okay? Maybe in
Yes,
the
Jose, I'm gonna show them now.
Hmm.
Sorry. So you could finish. I thought you were finished.
No, that I think that
No, I'm gonna show also Cladocora.
yes, this is a Cladocora caespitosa. It's a coral. It's present in extra-Mediterranean waters too. Here in the Mediterranean, this coral can build high extensions of the bottoms.
Yes.
But really, it's not possible to compare it with tropical reefs of corals. Okay.
Yes. This Cladocora thetosa, you see, is the only one that builds something similar to reefs in the Mediterranean, but they are not reefs anymore now. There were 2,000 years ago. There were still a few reefs of this species, but now we cannot find any reefs of Cladocora cespitosa. We can find structures maybe of 1 meter, in some places maybe up to 2 meters. Here in la Comunidad Valenciana, it's typical of 50 centimeters, 30, 20 small structures, but never too large. And these are the only ones we can find shallow, because they actually need light to make photosynthesis also. But we have only this species,
And
okay, in the Mediterranean.
this species is thermophilic species. This species needs warm waters. Okay.
But it can live in the colds of winter in the Mediterranean. That the tropical corals cannot. So that's its adaptation to be able to live with us.
Okay. It's clear. Maybe let's talk about turbulence a little bit, and then we divide it for the questions.
Okay. So the turbulence, Jose. Well, do you speak a little? You want about turbulence, and then.
I prefer to talk about marine currents, okay? Because
yeah, okay. Yes, exactly. More than turbulence itself.
Yes, I like to say only one idea. No, I think that marine currents are very important, not only in the Mediterranean Sea, because it's really basic in all the ecosystems in the rest of the marine world.
Yeah, the oceans.
Why? Because these currents transport organisms, sediments, nutrients, pollutants, seeds,
and heat.
larvae.
Yes.
Okay, heat. Okay, and many species from one place to another. Okay, the marine currents are really very, very important. I think you can check many models of circulation of Mediterranean marine waters on some specialized books of
web pages now.
Yeah. Okay, oceanographics in physics, because I think that if the scientists can study the currents, we can understand some complex process about the biology of many species and possible environmental problems in the future.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sure. Look, without these currents, the deep parts of the Mediterranean and of the oceans will be dead. There wouldn't be any oxygen in the deep areas of the Mediterranean Sea, and also the heat will be concentrated in the equator, and we will have very warm, very hot places in the equator and very cold places in the poles. But the currents of the sea, of the oceans, are actually distributing this heat and taking warm waters to cold areas and actually warming all the planet and cooling the equator. So that's very, very important. That's how they slowly transport energy all around the Mediterranean or the oceans. We were talking, Jose and I, the other day, that one thing to point out about the Mediterranean Sea is that it doesn't have strong currents, actually, and that it doesn't have tides or very low tides. We have here maybe 30 centimeter tides. In a specific special day, we could have 50 or 60 centimeters, but when everything coincides, a low pressure with the moon in a special location, etc., then we can have a big tide. But usually, I mean, the big tide is 60 centimeters, but we, except in the Adriatic and except in some places of Tunisia, we don't have strong tides here. And the currents are more like conveyor belts moving the energy and the warmth and the nutrients, the heat around the Mediterranean. The salt, because it's very important, the salinity and the density of the water is one of the motors of the currents in the Mediterranean Sea, starting in the Adriatic and the Adriatic and the Greek parts of the Mediterranean Sea. And these waters, because they are very dense, because they are very cold and very saline, they go to the deep layers, and then they start moving all the deep layers and moving all the waters in the Mediterranean. This produces some turbulence, maybe in the slope. There are some currents. Some organisms live there in the slope of the in the border of the continental slope, and these currents bring food to them. But if we, sorry, Jose, see, yes.
No, that in relation that you are talking about, it's interesting the effect of these currents in the Strait of Gibraltar, okay, because the Mediterranean water are
deep.
Deep, and the Atlantic waters are in the surface, okay? And it's very interesting in the Strait of Gibraltar, this interchange of waters and individuals between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean.
Yes.
It's estimated.
You remember, Jose, it said, I mean, I remember having read that the Phoenicians used like this kind of deep anchors. So they were on the surface, and they put these anchors. They were like velas. No, I don't know how to say it in English. Like sails, but underwater sails, and then they use the water of the Mediterranean going out in deep layers to push their boats outside of the Mediterranean Sea to fight the current of the Atlantic going inside, with less dense and surface layers of water.
I think it's very funny, no? The representation of the marine currents in the film Finding Nemo, I think is the name, no? In English,
yes,
no?
Finding Nemo.
Yeah, because I think it's very curious that how the ocean currents are in continuous movement in the bottom, and all the animals get into these tongues of waters traveling, no, in the world, no, from
they distribute the larvae and
to another.
Diversity. In fact, the diversity of the oceans depends quite a lot of the currents. They transport larvae, and if places where currents bring larvae have more diversity than places that actually do not have these currents bringing in the larvae. That happens, for example, in the eastern Pacific,
some
western coast of the United States.
Yes, some physical oceanographers who are working in the world, no, in the marine currents in the world, say that marine currents are like the circulatory system of the planet. Okay.
Yeah. Yes,
I think it's a very interesting idea.
Okay, and then said this, if we will want to talk about turbulence itself, I think that Jose, the only point or the most interesting point where we could find turbulence is in the waves, in the breaking waves.
Yes.
That's where we find really a lot of turbulence. I mean, that's where turbulent water movement and chaotic water movement occurs. Then is the physics of waves, depending on the type of seabed, the slope of the seabed, and the phase, which is the distance to the next shore. Actually, that is related to the kind of waves we'll have and the kind of turbulence we have in a place. Of course, the stronger, if there's a storm, we'll have stronger waves and lots of turbulence everywhere.
Yes.
There are always couples, female and male inside. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like
And
an apartment in
yes.
Posidonia oceanica meadows. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well,
And what else? I mean, nowadays, you know, it's been a disease. What Jose was talking, there was a disease that is killing them, and then we are actually working, trying to reproduce them in captivity. We maintain them in aquariums. The few that left in the Spanish Mediterranean, we maintain them in aquariums here in IMEDMAR in Calpe, and try to make the best food for them and try to make them to mature and produce eggs so we can get some larvae. It's very difficult actually. We've been several years working on it, and they have very delicate larvae, which is very difficult to grow. So we weren't able to do it yet. Hmm?
Yeah.
I mean, it has. We're done here, or we we can be talking for hours. I
yes.
mean, I'm gonna tell you one interesting thing about Pina Nobilis. One last thing. In one of our researches, we found that we were studying it for years. We studied it in situ. We built an electrical system. We put on the shells, on the two shells, and then we measured for 2 years how they moved. When they open the valve, when they open, when they close, and then we recorded also currents and water temperature, everything, light. We recorded chlorophyll, etc., turbidity, oxygen concentration, and we found that during summer, from the early July to early November,
Yes.
they have a perfect synchronization with the light of sun and the moon. So they open the valve when there is sunlight or moonlight, and they close the valves when there is no sunlight or moonlight. So, for example, if the sun sets at 10, they close at 10, except that if there is a moon in the sky, then they don't close the valve until the moon is set. So if the moon sets at 3 a.m., then they close the valve at 3 a.m. And then they don't open the valve again until 7 a.m. when the sun is back again.